You've been lied to about what it means to be a complete man, and the biggest lie is that you need a woman to validate your existence. Right now, thousands of men are making a radical choice that society calls pathological, but Friedrich Nietzsche would have called evolutionary. They're permanently deleting women from their lives and discovering a form of masculine power that most men never experience. This isn't about becoming a bitter hermit or giving up on human connection. This is about something far more dangerous to the status quo. Men who refuse to base their identity on romantic success and choose to forge their own path, regardless of social expectations or biological urges. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about relationships, masculinity, and what it really means to live authentically as a man in a world that profits from your emotional dependency. When Nietzsche spoke of the will to power, he wasn't talking about dominating others, but about mastering yourself and your circumstances. For men who choose to permanently remove women from their lives, this concept becomes the foundation of their transformation. The will to power means refusing to let external validation, especially from romantic relationships, define your worth or direction. It's about recognizing that true strength comes from within, and that dependency on others for happiness is actually a form of weakness that Nietzsche would have despised. Many men discover that their entire identity was built around pleasing women or maintaining relationships that drain their energy and potential. The will to power demands that you take control of your life's narrative instead of letting others write it for you. This isn't about hatred or resentment toward women. It's about choosing your own path regardless of social expectations or biological urges. When you delete women from your life permanently, you're exercising the most fundamental expression of the will to power. The power to say no to what diminishes you and yes to what elevates you. The masculine independence that emerges from this choice isn't isolation. It's liberation from the need for external completion. Nietzsche believed that the strongest individuals are those who can stand alone without requiring others to fill their emotional voids. When you embrace this philosophy, you stop seeking relationships as escapes from loneliness and start building a life so fulfilling that adding another person becomes a choice rather than a necessity. This is the difference between the weak man who needs women and the powerful man who chooses his own destiny. Nietzsche's concept of beyond good and evil challenges you to question the moral framework society has built around relationships. Traditional relationship expectations tell you that commitment equals virtue and solitude equals failure. But what if these labels are just chains designed to keep you trapped in patterns that serve others rather than yourself? When you move beyond conventional morality, you realize that choosing to delete women from your life isn't evil, it's simply your truth. Society will judge you, but Nietzsche taught that the opinions of the masses are irrelevant to those who create their own values. Most men accept relationship blueprints without questioning whether these serve their authentic interests or just perpetuate cycles of emotional dependency. Beyond good and evil means examining your romantic patterns without the guilt or shame that society attaches to unconventional choices. Maybe monogamy isn't natural for you. Maybe the pursuit of romantic love has become a distraction from your higher purpose. These aren't moral failures. They're personal truths that require courage to acknowledge and act upon. The freedom that comes from transcending relationship morality is terrifying for most people because it requires taking full responsibility for your choices. When you stop judging your decisions through society's lens, you can finally ask the only question that matters: does this serve my growth and authentic self-expression? Nietzsche would argue that a man who chooses permanent solitude based on his own values is more moral than one who stays in relationships out of obligation or fear. The Ubermensch isn't a superhuman being. It's a man who has transcended the need for external validation and creates his own meaning in life. When you delete women permanently from your existence, you're potentially stepping into this higher form of consciousness. The Ubermensch doesn't follow the herd's relationship patterns because he understands that most people live according to values they never consciously chose. Society tells you that romantic success equals life success, but the Ubermensch questions this assumption and creates his own definition of fulfillment. Creating your own values means rejecting the blueprint that says men must pursue women to be complete or successful. The Ubermensch recognizes that chasing romantic validation is often a distraction from developing his authentic power and purpose. He doesn't need a woman to feel whole because he has cultivated internal sources of meaning and satisfaction. This isn't about becoming cold or heartless. It's about becoming so complete within yourself that you don't require others to fill gaps in your identity or emotional landscape. The transition to Ubermensch thinking requires destroying your old self and rebuilding from the ground up. This process is painful because it means letting go of comfortable lies and facing uncomfortable truths about your motivations and dependencies. But when you emerge from this transformation, you become a man who acts from strength rather than need, who chooses rather than reacts, who creates rather than consumes. The Ubermensch doesn't delete women from his life out of weakness, but from the recognition that his path requires complete self-sovereignty. Amor fati means loving your fate, embracing everything that has happened to you, including the painful experiences that led you to delete women from your life permanently. Nietzsche taught that true strength comes not from avoiding suffering, but from transforming it into wisdom and power. The heartbreaks, betrayals, and disappointments you've experienced weren't accidents or punishments, but necessary steps in your evolution toward authentic self-knowledge. When you practice Amor fati, you stop viewing your relationship failures as evidence of your inadequacy and start seeing them as gifts that revealed important truths about yourself and others. Many men resist accepting the reality that some connections must end because they've been conditioned to view relationship loss as personal failure. But Nietzsche would argue that clinging to what no longer serves you is the real failure. The failure to honor your own growth and authentic needs. Amor fati doesn't mean becoming passive or resigned. It means actively embracing the lessons that painful experiences have taught you and using them to build a stronger foundation for your future choices. The painful truth that many men must face is that their desire for romantic connection often comes from weakness rather than strength, from emptiness rather than fullness. Accepting this reality through Amor fati allows you to stop seeking relationships as solutions to internal problems and start building genuine self-sufficiency. When you love your fate, including the decision to remove women from your life, you transform what others see as loss into your greatest source of personal power and freedom. Nietzsche's eternal recurrence is the ultimate test of whether you're living authentically. Imagine having to repeat your exact life infinite times, including every relationship pattern and romantic decision. Would you choose the same cycles of pursuing women who drain your energy, the same patterns of emotional dependency, the same compromises that diminish your authentic self? Most men would immediately recognize that their relationship history is filled with choices they wouldn't want to repeat for eternity. This realization becomes the catalyst for permanent change and the decision to delete women from their lives entirely. The eternal recurrence test forces you to examine whether your romantic pursuits are driven by genuine desire or by unconscious programming and social conditioning. If you had to live through the same arguments, the same emotional manipulation, the same cycles of hope and disappointment forever, would you still choose to engage in romantic relationships? For many men, the honest answer is a resounding no. They recognize that their relationship patterns have been sources of suffering rather than genuine fulfillment and growth. When you apply eternal recurrence to your decision to remove women permanently from your life, the question becomes whether you can embrace this choice with complete acceptance and joy. If the thought of living your current path of solitude and self-development for eternity fills you with peace rather than regret, then you know you're aligned with your authentic nature. The eternal recurrence test doesn't judge your choices. It simply reveals whether you're living according to your deepest truth or according to expectations that aren't genuinely your own. Nietzsche distinguished between master morality and slave morality, two fundamentally different approaches to life and relationships. Master morality creates values from strength and self-determination, while slave morality operates from resentment and reactive patterns. In romantic relationships, most men unknowingly adopt slave morality. They define themselves through their ability to please women, gain approval, and maintain relationships at any cost. This reactive stance makes them slaves to external validation and feminine approval, rather than masters of their own destiny and emotional state. Slave morality in relationships manifests as the constant need to prove your worth through romantic success, the belief that being single means failure, and the willingness to compromise your authentic self to maintain connection with women. Men operating from slave morality measure their value through relationship status and female attention because they've internalized society's definition of masculine success. They become reactive to women's moods and demands, adjusting their behavior to avoid conflict or rejection rather than standing firm in their own values and boundaries. Master morality in relationships means creating your own definition of success and fulfillment that doesn't depend on romantic validation or female approval. When you delete women from your life permanently, you're potentially stepping into master morality, choosing solitude from strength rather than isolation from resentment. The master doesn't need relationships to feel complete because he has developed internal sources of meaning and satisfaction. He acts from abundance rather than scarcity, from choice rather than need, from self-respect rather than the desperate hunger for external validation that characterizes slave mentality. Nietzsche warned about the emergence of the last man, a creature who seeks only comfort, security, and the path of least resistance. In relationships, the last man settles for mediocrity, stays in comfortable but unfulfilling partnerships, and avoids the difficult work of authentic self-development. He chooses the familiar pain of toxic relationship patterns over the unknown territory of genuine growth and self-mastery. The last man fears solitude because it forces him to confront his own emptiness, so he clings to relationships that provide distraction rather than genuine connection or personal evolution. Most men today embody the last man mentality in their romantic lives. They pursue relationships not from strength but from the desire to avoid discomfort and maintain social acceptance. They stay in situations that slowly kill their spirit because breaking free requires courage and the willingness to face uncertainty. The last man tells himself that compromise and settling are virtues when they're actually forms of spiritual suicide. He mistakes comfort for happiness and confuses familiarity with love. The higher man that Nietzsche envisioned represents the opposite path. He chooses difficulty over comfort when difficulty leads to authentic growth and self-realization. When you delete women from your life permanently, you're potentially choosing the path of the higher man, embracing temporary discomfort and social judgment for the sake of long-term authenticity and power. The higher man understands that some forms of solitude are more fulfilling than most forms of connection, and that personal evolution sometimes requires leaving behind everything that keeps you small and dependent. Nietzsche's Perspectivism teaches that there are no absolute truths, only different perspectives based on individual experience and values. When it comes to relationships, society promotes one dominant narrative: that romantic partnership is essential for happiness, and that men who choose permanent solitude are damaged or incomplete. But Perspectivism reveals this as just one viewpoint among many, not an objective truth that applies to every man's life and circumstances. Your perspective on women and relationships is shaped by your unique experiences. And if those experiences have taught you that solitude serves your growth better than partnership, then that's your valid truth. The mainstream perspective insists that healthy men naturally desire romantic relationships, and that choosing permanent solitude indicates psychological problems or emotional damage. But from your perspective, based on your lived experience, you may have discovered that relationships consistently drain your energy, distract from your purpose, and prevent you from reaching your highest potential. Neither perspective is objectively right or wrong. They're simply different ways of interpreting the same reality. Based on different values and experiences, Perspectivism liberates you from the need to justify your choice to delete women from your life according to society's standards or expectations. Your truth doesn't need external validation because it's based on your authentic experience, rather than abstract theories about how men should behave. When you embrace Perspectivism, you realize that the men who judge your choices are operating from their own limited perspective, one that may not apply to your unique circumstances, values, and life path. When you delete women from your life permanently, you face a dangerous philosophical trap that Nietzsche understood well: the potential descent into nihilism. Nihilism is the belief that nothing matters, that life has no inherent meaning or purpose, and that all human activities are ultimately pointless. After removing romantic relationships from your existence, you might initially feel liberated, but then face the void where those connections used to be. Without the drama, emotions, and external validation that relationships provided, you may struggle to find new sources of meaning and motivation in your daily existence. Nietzsche recognized nihilism as a necessary stage in human development, but warned against getting stuck there permanently. The danger lies in using your rejection of romantic relationships as evidence that nothing in life has value or significance. You might begin to view all human connections as meaningless, all pursuits as futile, and existence itself as an empty exercise in survival. This nihilistic perspective can lead to depression, isolation, and the complete abandonment of personal growth and self-development efforts. The key to avoiding nihilistic collapse is understanding that rejecting one source of meaning doesn't eliminate all possibilities for creating purpose and significance in your life. Nietzsche taught that after destroying old values and beliefs, you must become a creator of new ones. Cutting ties with women can be the beginning of a journey toward authentic self-creation, rather than the end of meaning itself. The challenge is to use your newfound freedom and solitude as raw material for building something greater, rather than settling into empty cynicism about human nature and existence. Nietzsche's most famous imperative was to become who you are, to discover and actualize your authentic self rather than living according to external expectations or inherited values. For men who delete women from their lives permanently, this process becomes both possible and necessary in ways that wouldn't occur within traditional relationship structures. Romantic relationships often require constant compromise and adjustment to another person's needs, desires, and emotional patterns. While this can lead to growth, it can also prevent you from fully exploring your individual potential and discovering what you're truly capable of achieving when freed from external constraints and obligations. Becoming who you are requires honest self-examination without the distraction of romantic drama or the need to maintain another person's approval and happiness. In solitude, you can finally ask the fundamental questions that relationships often obscure. What do you actually want from life when nobody else's opinion matters? What brings you genuine satisfaction versus what you think should bring you satisfaction? What kind of man do you become when you're not performing for female attention or validation? These questions can only be answered through direct experience and experimentation rather than through theory or social conditioning. The isolation that comes from cutting ties with women becomes a laboratory for self-discovery and authentic development. You can pursue interests, develop skills, and explore philosophical and spiritual questions without needing to justify or explain your choices to a romantic partner. This freedom allows you to become who you truly are rather than who you think you should be to maintain relationships and social acceptance. The man who emerges from this process is fundamentally different from the one who began it. The path of permanently deleting women from your life isn't about hatred or resentment. It's about choosing authentic self-development over comfortable mediocrity. Nietzsche would recognize this choice as potentially heroic, the decision to forge your own path despite social pressure and biological programming. But here's the crucial question that will determine whether this choice leads to greatness or emptiness. Are you using this solitude to become the highest version of yourself, or are you simply running away from the challenges that growth requires? The difference between the man who transcends through isolation and the one who stagnates in bitterness lies in what he does with his newfound freedom. Will you become the creator of your own values and meaning, or will you let nihilism consume the space where relationships used to be? The choice is yours, but remember that Nietzsche's philosophy demands action, creation, and the courage to build something meaningful from the ashes of what you've destroyed. If this exploration of masculine independence and philosophical self-mastery resonates with your journey, then subscribe to this channel, where we dive deep into the uncomfortable truths that most men refuse to face about themselves and their relationships with the world.